G'day, old David here again, briefly. I've been hearing the term flatten the curve used in relation to the COVID-19 pandemic. Been used in a few different ways. Thought I'd try and sort of disaggregate those two ways. I should note that I'm in the back garden studio and the wind is picking up, so you may or may not hear a fair bit of wind noise and some creaking of branches on the roof. Apologies for that. Very quickly, the main thing that's meant by flattening the curve, let me draw my graph. This axis is time. It's always time. It's how long we have the pandemic for in a particular place, usually. So globally or in a particular country. This axis can be either cases or fatalities, but let's talk cases first. So number of cases over time. So the key meaning of flattening the curve is that you can potentially, in a community, either have a curve that goes like this, and our curve at the moment very much goes like that. It's a classic exponential shape, but that at some point you get control measures or you get immunity or you get a vaccine. It goes over and comes down again. And you end up, hopefully, back down close to zero infections. We don't know whether that's going to be the case with this. We don't know whether there'll be an effective vaccine, whether enough people will get immune to it over time, or a whole variety of other possibilities. But now that curve is the quick short curve. The assumption is that if you kind of didn't take any measures, the curve would be like that. It would be steep, narrow, pointy, and the capacity of the medical system in terms of ventilators, intensive care unit beds, etc. Let's call that about there somewhere. So if your curve of infections is shaped like that, then you exceed that capacity of the medical system and you start having to make very difficult decisions. Do we treat this person and not that person because we only have enough resources to treat one? You start having people die who wouldn't die otherwise because they can't get the medical care they need because the system is overwhelmed. So that's a bad outcome and you want to avoid it. So what's usually meant by flattening the curve is that rather you take steps to get people infected more slowly. You keep them away from each other, you wash hands, you isolate, etc. And the goal is to get a curve that is shaped like this. You spread the infection out in time. Now that means that the restrictions might last longer in time, but it means that fewer people will die. It means that hopefully, if you get it right, you could get some intermediate curve that does go above the capacity of the medical system, and you hope that you won't. But what you hope is that you'll manage to spread it out enough that the medical system that can cope, people will still die, but the fewest possible number of people will die because you'll be able to treat everybody who needs treating. So that's what we mean by flatten the curve. Now, the area under those two curves, the area under this one and the area under this one would be the same for the number of cases. In other words, changing this doesn't really change the overall total number of cases. It might change it slightly in terms of who gets in contact with the virus when. There may be seasonal effects. It might be worse in winter when the rest of our immune system is lower and so on, but probably those areas would be fairly similar. But the area, if my axis instead said deaths or fatalities, what you achieve by flattening the curve is that the area under this curve would actually be smaller. Less people would die. Less people would die at each of the different stages, so the overall area under the deaths curve for a flattened curve would be a smaller area than the area under a pointy curve because you wouldn't get this problem of overwhelmed medical system. Does that make sense? So that's the idea of a flattened curve. The other sense I'm seeing the term used in, though, and that's why it's kind of confusing and that's why it's probably helpful to talk about it, is that we are seeing this sort of growth curve, and like any curve, it has a slope at a particular time that you could draw. There's the line itself. You could draw a tangent line, a line that just touches it at one point, and that would be the slope of the line at that point. So let me get rid of that because it's going to make it difficult to draw the other diagram. Oops, lost the whole line. So you've got your line. This is, again, the growth in number of cases. And in Australia, at least, because we have, we think, successfully isolated and we've stopped, we're past the point where lots of people are coming back from overseas already with infections and so on. What we're seeing is a reduction in the daily increase. We actually aren't as far as that curve I've just drawn suggests. It is still at the point where it's an increase, but it's an increase with a smaller slope. It's down on the order of 50 or 100 or maybe even fewer new cases per day, when a week or so ago it was 350 or 400 new cases a day. So we haven't flattened it in the terms of being horizontal, because this is the other usage of flattening the curve. Flattening the curve in the sense of the gradient getting closer and closer to a flat horizontal line. That's obviously an ideal. Once you get to that point, you're getting no new cases appearing. And if this is a graph of cumulative, it will only ever stay flat, because cases that did occur aren't going to magically go back in time and not occur. But if it's a graph of current number of cases, then your current number of cases increases. Then it comes back to being this curve again. You want the current number of cases to have a negative slope, a slope pointing downward, until it goes back to zero. So two uses of flattening the curve. One is decreasing the bumpiness of the bump and spreading it out over time to make sure the medical system can cope. And two is changing the slope of the curve towards flatness, if that makes sense. This top one is the correct one, or the way the term is being used technically, but lots of politicians and governors and medical people and a whole range of other people are kind of having a slip up and saying the curve is getting flatter. By that they mean the gradient of the number of increasing cases is slowing. So I hope that's helpful. It, in some ways, a simple topic, but hopefully one that, if you're not familiar with the terms or the reasons why we're using them suddenly and why we're so obsessed with graphs suddenly, hopefully this is helpful. Thanks a lot. See ya.